All our stories are created for entertainment purposes only.
Our marriage began nearly 3 years ago. About a year back, she began an affair with one of her co-workers. I started suspecting something was off when I saw his car parked outside my house one day. Those suspicions led me to hire a private investigator to gather evidence of her infidelity, and it turns out my doubts were justified. When I found out, I was furious. To make matters worse, the co-worker's wife called me one day, having discovered the affair as well. She only had some text messages they had exchanged, but I had solid proof of their meetings. Together, we decided it was time to confront our spouses. We met up frequently to discuss the situation. She confided in me that she had suspected her husband's affair even during her pregnancy. They have 3 children together. One day, we came up with the idea of seeking revenge by sleeping with each other. We went through with it, and I won't lie, it felt good. We've been meeting up and having an affair for a while now. She's an incredible woman, and I have to admit that in some aspects of our intimate relationship, she surpasses my wife. Most of all, though, my anger is directed towards my wife. I read some of her texts with her affair partner, and they mocked the co-worker's wife, making cruel comments about her appearance and other derogatory things. It's hard to believe my wife would stoop so low, especially considering she's a woman herself. She even ridiculed my fertility issues, questioning my manhood due to my low chances of having children. I don't feel remorseful about my affair. I actually prefer the physical aspect of my relationship with the co-worker's wife over my wife. My wife rarely agrees on BJ, yet she expects it from me. On the other hand, the co-worker's wife was more enthusiastic about it, making it the best experience I've ever had. Now, both the co-worker's wife and I are contemplating telling her husband about our revenge affair. We've come to realize that we got carried away by our desire for revenge and ended up addicted to it. I'm planning to confront my wife soon, and I've already prepared the divorce papers. Fortunately, we don't have joint assets or a shared bank account, so the process should be relatively straightforward for us. As for the co-worker's wife, she might face some challenges due to their children, but she has the power to take him to the cleaners. I know I might come across as a terrible person, but I've mentally checked out of my marriage. Update. I finally served my wife with divorce papers on July 16th. I had to take some time to get things in order before doing so. I decided to serve her at her workplace. When she returned home, I had her things packed and told her to go stay with her dad. As expected, she went through the typical cheater's playbook, begging, apologizing, and trying to shift the blame onto me for her affair. I was prepared for all of it. She was adamant about not leaving and wanting to fix our marriage. I reminded her that the house belongs to my parents and their names are on it. If she didn't leave voluntarily, I could call them to have her evicted. I also reached out to her sister thinking she might intervene, but instead, her sister blamed me for giving up on the marriage so easily. This is where I got a bit petty and said, "It's hypocritical coming from someone who left her husband for his cousin. I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." She slapped me, and I warned her that it was her last chance, or I would involve the police. After she left, the messages from her kept coming. I didn't block her because I wanted to capture some of the messages as evidence. She went from apologies to mocking me, claiming she never enjoyed our intimacy and that she and her affair partner had been intimate all over our house. I don't know how much of it is true, but I've decided to replace the furniture regardless. I had the urge to tell her about the affair partner's wife and how we had defiled her car, but I refrained. The last time we spoke, her apology seemed more sincere. She confessed that she got carried away, and lately, she's been yearning to have children. I've mentioned before that I can't father children, and although she initially wanted to remain child-free, her biological clock has started ticking. She admitted she was wrong and that I was the best partner and husband one could have, but she wanted more. I asked her why she didn't communicate her desires earlier. We could have explored adoption or sperm banks. I couldn't help but ask if she was pregnant, and it seemed like she was. She confirmed it. I knew this child couldn't be mine. Any hope of reconciliation flew out the window. I imagined that if I hadn't discovered the affair, she would have presented this pregnancy as a miracle baby. I congratulated her and wished her a wonderful pregnancy. I want this divorce to be finalized as soon as possible. Regarding the affair partner's wife, she has also served her husband with divorce papers and is seeking a fair settlement. She's not backing down. We've had a few conversations where she expressed regret for investing her prime years in such a repulsive man. She mentioned leaving her modeling career to be with him. I must say, she still looks fantastic. We haven't been in touch for a while, except for one instance when she sent me a suggestive text after having a few drinks, but I declined. She later apologized. We're not planning to start dating anytime soon, at least until all the divorce proceedings are over. However, I do miss her a lot. On a brighter note, I adopted a cat. My soon-to-be ex-wife hated cats, so now my house will be a cat kingdom. Story 2. My younger brother, Mark, used to date my fiancée, Jen, about a year ago. Just to give you some context, they were together back in August 2022. Their relationship only lasted for a month before he ended things with her because he got bored with being in a relationship and wasn't really interested in settling down anyway. At the time they were dating, I was in a different state, so I had no clue that he even had a girlfriend, and I had no idea who Jen was until I met her. Jen and I met at a bar when I moved back in October, and we hit it off really well. She was easily the most beautiful and intelligent woman I had ever met. We hung out a few more times, and eventually we made our relationship official. Fast forward to December, and I finally brought her up to my family and suggested they meet her during Christmas. They knew I was in a relationship, but I'm not the most open person about my personal life, so I kept the details about her to a minimum until I was sure about the seriousness of our relationship. My parents wanted to see pictures, and they started passing my phone around the dinner table. That's when Mark saw it and exploded, calling me a terrible brother for dating his ex-girlfriend and demanding that I break up with her. I refused. When I talked to Jen about it, she confirmed that they had dated and gave me the details of their breakup. It took a few weeks, but eventually, Mark stopped bringing up the fact that I was dating his ex, and I thought he had moved on from it. Everything seemed okay. On Jen's birthday this year, I took her out to a fancy dinner with both of our families and her closest friends, and I asked her to marry me. Mark flipped out once again, berating me for proposing to her. However, my sisters and I immediately shut him down. This incident happened just this past weekend. For the past 2 months, Mark had been relatively quiet about the whole situation. I didn't see him much, and I figured he had gone low contact with me, which I didn't have a problem with. Then he surprised us by inviting Jen and me for a family dinner at his apartment, along with my parents and sisters. I found it a bit odd, but since my parents and sisters were also going, we agreed to attend. The dinner itself was nice, nothing too fancy, and we moved to the living room for conversation. After about 30 minutes of normal talk, Mark stood up and announced that he had something important to say. He made a long speech about being happy to have his family around for his big moment, and then got down on one knee, pulling out this cheap ring and asking Jen to marry him. Jen was clearly confused and uncomfortable and demanded that he put the ring away and stand up. My dad tried to intervene, but I got to Mark first and punched him. Honestly, I can't recall most of what he said because I was so furious, but it was something along the lines of trying to prove that Jen wasn't really into me and just wanted to get back at him. Before things could escalate further, my parents ushered me out, promising to talk to Mark. It's been a few days since this whole incident, and I'm still incredibly angry. I don't know what to do at this point. I'm worried that Jen might have second thoughts about marrying me because of this. Any advice? I'd like to address a few points that came up in the comments. Jen and I are newly engaged. It was one of those situations where we both felt this was the real deal. It may seem fast, but I'm absolutely certain about her. When we first met, I was the one who initiated the conversation, not the other way around. I'm not sure if she knew or suspected that we were related somehow. When I found out about her past with Mark, I asked her, and she claimed she had no idea. I didn't have a reason to doubt her, but I must admit that Mark's rather intense reaction does make me wonder. I had no clue that she and Mark used to date when I first met her. To be honest, Mark and I aren't close at all. We used to be when we were younger, but as we grew up, we drifted apart and communicated less and less. Before I moved back, we rarely spoke except on special occasions like birthdays. Jen was aware of my family, but I didn't tell her much about them until I felt ready to introduce her to them. When she and Mark crossed paths again, I didn't sense any lingering feelings from either of them. She didn't treat him like a complete stranger, but she wasn't overly affectionate with him either. I was told that their relationship lasted only a month. I didn't think I needed Mark's permission to propose to Jen, but perhaps I was wrong about that. I'm still not entirely sure. That being said, I intend to have a conversation with Mark this weekend to clear the air and get a better understanding of the situation. I admit I didn't ask for his side of their relationship, and that's my oversight. Update. I gave Mark a call and invited him to my place for a chat. I mentioned that I'd prefer to have Jen present for the conversation, but I was open to talking with just him if that's what he preferred. He agreed to meet both of us and showed up at my place around noon today. There was a bit of an awkward silence for a few minutes before I initiated the conversation. I began by apologizing for not giving him a heads up about my proposal plans to Jen, and I also apologized for the physical altercation between us. He responded with a somewhat nonchalant, "whatever," but acknowledged the apology. I proceeded to share with him what Jen had told me about their past relationship and breakup when I asked her about it. I wanted him to confirm if her account was accurate. I essentially expressed that his reactions throughout this whole ordeal have seemed quite extreme, and I wanted to ensure I wasn't misunderstanding the depth of their relationship or underestimating its significance. Mark confirmed that their relationship only lasted for a few weeks, and he was the one who initiated the breakup because he had lost interest. Jen then asked if his recent behavior was because he still had feelings or regrets about ending things with her. Mark admitted that he thought she looked more attractive than when he had last seen her, but emphasized that he had no lingering feelings or regrets. He explained that he didn't like the idea of his younger brother dating someone he had dated, even if it was for a short period. He felt that, as a man, I shouldn't have pursued a relationship with his ex-girlfriend, considering our family ties. I reminded him that I had no knowledge of their past relationship, so it wasn't a deliberate choice on my part. He brushed it off and insisted that I should have ended things regardless. He firmly believed that if the roles were reversed, he would have done the same, although I had my doubts. I questioned why he proposed to her if he had no lingering feelings for her. To put it simply, one of his buddies, who was around when Mark and Jen were dating, suggested that Jen might have known about our family connection from the start and was using this relationship to get back at him, especially since she had some unresolved feelings after their breakup. They thought it would be a good idea to test this theory by having Mark propose to her and see if she would choose him over me. Jen asked him to explain why he believed she was still hung up on him, and he mentioned that he had heard she inquired about him after the breakup and saw her at places they used to visit, which led him to assume that she might still have feelings. Jen clarified that she had only asked about him once after the breakup and had been hanging out at those places with her friends even before they started dating. She assured him that she wouldn't avoid those places just because of a past breakup and expressed her offense at the suggestion that she would pursue a relationship with me solely to seek revenge on him. He gave her a half-hearted apology, but insisted she consider his perspective. He questioned whether she genuinely didn't know about our relation, and she explained that she didn't notice the resemblance between us until we were in the same room, and our personalities were quite different, so it had never crossed her mind. He acknowledged this and concluded the conversation. Before leaving, he mentioned that I could retract his wedding invitation because he couldn't support our relationship, given his history with her. I assured him that he wouldn't need to worry about that, as he was likely going to be uninvited anyway. It's been a few hours since our conversation, and I do feel somewhat relieved. My parents weren't thrilled about him being uninvited, but they understood that it was a mutual decision and possibly for the best. My sisters supported my decision, believing that he didn't have a valid reason for his behavior, and they didn't blame me for not wanting him at the wedding. At this point, I plan to limit my contact with Mark, and I doubt he'll reach out to me anytime soon either. Here's the update on the situation. So I've kept my distance from Mark since our last talk. We haven't reached out to each other, and we've only interacted during family gatherings. Currently, my mom is upset that Mark is still not invited to my wedding. The issue came up during my younger sister Sophie's 22 female birthday celebration. Her boyfriend, with whom she's been together for about 4 years, proposed to her that night, and we were chatting about her dream wedding plans. She mentioned the idea of a destination wedding, her thoughts on the cake and dress, and then casually said something like, "Teddy, I know Mark's not allowed at your wedding, but you won't mind if he comes to mine, right?" I chuckled and assured her that I couldn't get upset about her guest list even if I wanted to. However, My mom gave me a strange look and inquired if Mark was still excluded from my wedding. I confirmed that he was, and she seemed irritated. She thought I was joking and accused me of being unreasonable for banning him since he's family. She suggested that I was holding on to a grudge out of pettiness. I reminded her that Mark and I had both agreed to him not coming. I also pointed out that this wasn't the right time to discuss my wedding since it was Sophie's special day. I mentioned that if either Mark or my mom wanted to talk about my wedding, they could contact me separately. Sophie even chimed in, expressing her frustration with my mom trying to make her day about Mark, which seemed to put an end to the topic. Just so you know, Mark didn't attend Sophie's party because he had to work and couldn't make it. A few days later, my mom paid me a visit and wanted to talk about my wedding. She asked why I was so insistent on keeping Mark away from it. She felt I shouldn't be insecure about Mark and Jen's past relationship and that uninviting him was going too far. I explained that Mark and I had mutually agreed on him not attending, and if he had an issue with it, he could approach me directly. We ended up in an argument, and she mentioned that if I didn't reinvite Mark, she wouldn't come to the wedding because she felt I was ostracizing her son. I shrugged it off and told her that if that's what she wanted, she could toss her invitation because I wouldn't beg her to be there. She asked if I would really be okay with her not attending, and I informed her that it wouldn't be the first time she missed one of my events due to Mark. She accused me of being inconsiderate for throwing her past mistakes in her face and stormed out. Afterward, I received messages and calls from her and a few family members, all claiming that I was in the wrong and urging me to invite Mark just to keep the peace. My mom has also reached out to Jen, asking her to talk to me and persuade me to change my mind, but as far as I know, Jen hasn't responded to her messages. So far, most of my mom's family members are supporting her decision and won't be attending the wedding. On the other hand, my dad, his side of the family, my aunt, uncle, and their kids, my sisters, and Jen's family are all still planning to come. I also talked to Mark about the situation and asked if he had any issues with not receiving an invite. He basically told me that he initially uninvited himself and doesn't understand why this is such a big deal, as he still has no intention of attending. He advised me to keep him out of the conflict because he's not involved and mentioned he would tell my mom the same. Currently, I've gone back to maintaining low contact with my mom. However, my relationship with my dad remains relatively okay. I'm still contemplating whether to reinvite my mom and her family should they change their minds about the boycott. Realistically, the chances are slim, and I've discussed this with my dad, who understands the situation. As of now, Jen and I are exploring the possibility of downsizing the venue since the guest list has significantly shrunk. My mom remains uninvited from the wedding indefinitely. About 2 weeks after deciding not to attend, she came by and expressed her desire to clear the air and discuss everything. We agreed and invited her in for dinner. Jen prepared a plate of food for her, and I inquired if she still planned on skipping the wedding. She explained that she wanted to come but couldn't get past the fact that I hadn't invited Mark due to a simple mistake. I reminded her that Mark's simple mistake was proposing to my fiancée with me sitting just a few feet away, and she brushed it off as a joke. Jen asked her why she wanted to talk if she maintained the same stance on Mark attending the wedding. She replied that she wanted to have a conversation with Jen and hoped Jen would listen to her and persuade me to invite Mark again. She had apparently assumed I was at work and thought she could talk to Jen alone. Jen politely told her that even without my presence, she wouldn't have had that conversation anyway, because this was a matter concerning my brother. At some point, my mom made a comment implying that Jen was spineless and unable to engage in a conversation without me thinking for her. This sparked a heated exchange between the three of us before Jen eventually told her to leave. As she headed towards the door, my mom continued screaming, accusing her of tearing our family apart. Things escalated, and my mom even pulled Jen's hair and brought her to the ground while still shouting. She physically offended Jen, attempting to scratch her face. I intervened, pulling my mom away from her and escorting her outside. My mom banged on the door for a few minutes, but I ensured that Jen was okay before she left. She continued to call both of us repeatedly. Once I was certain that Jen was fine, I sent a text to my mom, making it clear that she shouldn't bother reaching out again because we have no intention of ever speaking to her. I also called my dad and sisters to inform them of the incident. My dad seemed surprised and tried to make excuses, mentioning that my mom had been stressed about the situation for a while. My sisters, on the other hand, seemed to expect my mom's outburst, as they described her as always having been a crazy buy, and offered to come over and check on Jen. I asked Jen if she wanted to press charges, but she declined, expressing her desire to cut all contact with my mom permanently. I pointed out that she should still consider talking to the police since she was physically offended, but she doesn't want my mom to get arrested. Fortunately, my sisters and Jen's mom came to comfort her, and she's doing okay now. My mom is blocked on all communication channels unless Jen decides otherwise. I'm not sure how to proceed from here. Jen is against involving the police, but my sisters and I believe it's necessary if only to have a record in case of future incidents. In an update, some people asked about my strained relationship with my mom and why I hadn't been open with Jen about my parents. I thought it might help to provide some background on our complicated family dynamics. As some of you mentioned, my brother Mark was the favored child in my mom's eyes. She didn't make much effort to hide it. Our parents didn't spend much quality time with my sisters and me, often leaving us with a sitter. However, they would frequently spend time with Mark, taking him shopping while we stayed home, or buying him his favorite food and toys separately from their regular shopping trips. Mark typically received better things than the rest of us. He'd get new, expensive clothes while ours were thrifted, or brand new toys just for him, whereas we had to share our old toys with each other. If my sisters and I received gifts, they were meant for all of us to share. But it was evident that Mark's belongings were exclusively his, and we were not allowed to touch them. When Mark misbehaved, I often faced the consequences for not setting a proper example or teaching him how to behave. For instance, if Mark broke his toys, I would be punished because it was assumed he learned that behavior from me. When Mark was 8 and got into trouble at school for attempting to push another kid down the stairs, I was grounded for 2 weeks and forced to apologize to the other child for not properly guiding my brother's behavior. When I turned 13, I started pushing my parents to give me an allowance. They agreed on one condition. I had to do household chores like mowing the lawn, taking out the trash, and raking leaves. In return, they'd give me around $25 a week to help me save up. However, things changed when Mark noticed I was getting money, and he begged our parents for an allowance too. Instead of making him do any chores, they took $10 from my allowance each week and gave it to him, claiming that we were both doing a great job with our chores, even though he never lifted a finger to help. Whenever I asked him to pitch in, he'd brush it off, saying it wasn't his responsibility. It was around this time that I started distancing myself from my brother. By the time I entered high school, we only spoke when we needed small favors or when there was no other choice. I got my first job at 17 because I wanted to buy my own car and have money that my parents couldn't make me share with Mark. My older sister Maggie helped me open my own bank account and taught me how to budget and save my earnings wisely. Finally, at 18, after a lot of hard work, I got my first car. However, when Mark got his driver's license, my parents asked if he could use my car for transportation and extra practice. Reluctantly, I agreed, and things were okay for a while. Mark would use my car when I didn't need it, and he helped maintain it reasonably well. But when he started pushing for our parents to buy him a car of his own, my mom approached me and demanded that I give my car to him because he needed it more. When I refused, she threatened to kick me out. That night, we had a heated argument, and she ended up giving my car to Mark, forcing me to transfer ownership within a few days. Since I had nowhere else to go at the time, I reluctantly went along with it. When I graduated from high school, both of my parents skipped my graduation ceremony because Mark didn't want to sit through it just to watch me receive a diploma. My mom didn't want to leave him alone for the night, so I only had the support of my sisters and my aunt and uncle, who wanted to take me out to celebrate. Unfortunately, they had to bring me home upon my parents' request, as they had prepared a dinner to make up for missing the ceremony. However, I couldn't eat the meal because my mom had placed shrimp and chicken on the same serving dish, and I'm allergic to shellfish. In my first year after high school, I worked 2 jobs to save up and buy myself another car. When the new school year started, I moved away for college and decided to cut off contact with my parents. They, mostly my mom, tried reaching out through social media and my sister Sophie during the first few months, but I ignored them. I even warned Sophie that I'd cut her off too if she kept trying to mediate. When my mom couldn't reach me through Sophie, She attempted to contact my older sister Charlotte, and a few times through Maggie and Mark. I even threatened to file a restraining order for harassment, although it was just a bluff because I had no idea how to do it. Nevertheless, it managed to scare her off, and the most contact I had from her over the years were occasional holiday texts. Around the time I moved back, Charlotte informed me that they had been seeing a family therapist at Charlotte's request, and my parents wanted to apologize for how they treated us. I was hesitant but agreed as long as they were sincere, and the process of reconciliation began when I moved back home. This just barely touches the surface of what they put me through, and it took a lot for me to even consider letting them back into my life. When I met Jen, I wasn't sure where my relationship with her was headed, let alone my relationship with my parents. I avoided mentioning my family because I was prepared to cut contact again if necessary. Jen was understanding about it being a sensitive subject and didn't press for more information. As for the most common question about why I chose to reconnect after everything, the simple answer is because I'd do anything for my sisters. Charlotte wanted the whole family to be present for the birth of her first child and to help her during the adjustment period. She didn't want part-time aunts and uncles who only visited her kid on birthdays and holidays. She was never one to ask for much growing up, so when she asked if I'd be willing to try for her, I agreed because it would make her happy. I also had a glimmer of hope that maybe they had changed. I don't regret trying to reconcile either. My parents may still be difficult, but I met the love of my life, so I consider it a win. Now, on to the update. Some people were curious to know if there have been any recent developments, so here's what's been going on. I apologize if it gets messy or confusing. A lot has happened. We decided to file a report with the police, and they informed us that even though Jen doesn't want to pursue legal action, it's not solely up to us to decide if it should go further. However, they assured us they would consider our preferences. We provided substantial evidence, including photos of Jen's injuries and text messages between my mom, dad, and me discussing what happened. The police advised us to report and document any further incidents involving my mom in case anything else happens. Given our location, we doubt it will lead to much, but at least we have it on record. I received about 100 angry text messages indicating that they have, at the very least, spoken with my mom regarding the incident. My mom tried to confront me as I was leaving work and started yelling at me, accusing me of trying to ruin her life. She kept shouting that I was a terrible son for attempting to get her arrested over a minor misunderstanding. She couldn't comprehend why she was being punished this way. I reminded her that if she didn't want to face legal trouble, she shouldn't have hit Jen. She insisted I should tell the police to drop the report, but I refused, explaining to her what the officer had said about it being out of my hands. She had a meltdown in the parking lot and even hit me a few times on the chest and arm before security stepped in and removed her from the premises. I had to explain the situation to my boss when I got back to work, and fortunately, she was understanding after I filled her in. When I got home, I shared what had transpired with Jen. She was understandably upset and suggested we discuss how to handle my family moving forward. We had a lengthy conversation, and taking advice from some Redditors, we decided to go completely no contact with my family, with the exception of my sisters. We both agreed that having them in our lives was causing unnecessary stress, especially considering we aren't even married yet. Jen expressed her desire to move away, creating some distance between us and my family. She had tried to stay out of my family issues because she believed it wasn't her place, but she refused to tolerate my mom's behavior or my dad enabling her offense any longer. We covered a lot more ground during our conversation, too much to include in this post, but I concurred with her assessment that my family was causing more trouble than they were worth. I didn't want to endure this anymore either. I also agreed to seek therapy, and Jen is helping me find a therapist. Following our discussion, I decided to call my dad and inform him of our decision to go no contact. He didn't answer my first call, so I left a message requesting a serious conversation. When he returned my call, he asked if it was okay for my mom to be part of the conversation. I agreed, as I felt she needed to hear what I had to say as well. Predictably, the conversation didn't go smoothly. I explained to both of them that Jen and I were cutting them out of our lives. My dad demanded to know why I was taking such a drastic step, especially after all the effort we had put into repairing our relationship. I told him that the situation with Mark had shown me that our relationship wasn't genuinely repaired. As far as they were concerned, the world revolved solely around my mom and my younger brother Mark. I pointed out that their ongoing favoritism toward Mark had driven our relationship to an irreparable point, and I had no interest in holding on to a failing relationship. I mentioned that I had initially agreed to reconcile for Charlotte's sake, but I couldn't tolerate the disrespect toward both Jen and me any longer. I was doing this for both of our well-being. To my mom, I added that I was exhausted from her using me as a scapegoat for her parenting failures and Mark's behavior. I made it clear that I would never forgive her for what she had done to Jen and for her mistreatment of me and my sisters throughout our upbringing. She began to suggest that I should move on like my sisters have, but I interrupted her and stated that she should accept their forgiveness and move on because she would never receive it from me, especially after everything she's done in recent weeks. She started crying and questioned how I could treat her like a villain. I replied that she should only blame herself because I hadn't done anything wrong. She cried even harder and expressed regret for having me and accused me of trying to ruin her life. This led to another intense argument between her and Jen, with Jen using some colorful language to describe her, among other not-so-nice names, for saying such hurtful things to me. I'm not sure if my mom left the room or just decided to keep quiet, but she stopped talking when Jen had her say. My dad expressed his disapproval of being shut out of my life and asked me to empathize with my mom's perspective. He mentioned that she was also struggling because her kids were at odds, and he believed I was being unfair by punishing her for her challenges in raising and caring for us. He concluded by saying we were a family, and I shouldn't let past mistakes hinder our ability to move forward together. I responded by telling him that my mom had only ever cared for Mark and herself, and there was nothing he could say or do to change my mind. I also informed him that he could decide whether to keep my number, but I would be blocking him and my mom on all platforms, and I wouldn't reach out again before hanging up. Afterwards, I composed a lengthy email in which I attached the link to my posts and uninvited everyone except my aunt, uncle, and my sisters to the wedding. I hadn't shed tears in a long while, but Jen comforted me while I cried after sending the email, assuring me that we would be okay. My sisters also reached out to me after reading the email. I apologized to Charlotte for not being able to continue reconciling as she had hoped, but she reassured me, saying it was okay and not my fault that I had to cut them off once more. The reaction from my family has been quite mixed. Some are upset that I shared family problems on a public internet forum, while others are angry at my parents because they had no idea it was this bad. The most recent person I discussed everything with was Mark. He inquired if I was cutting him off as well, and I told him I wasn't, but I wouldn't be making extra efforts to reach out to him either. He didn't argue and simply wished me well with the wedding, and we haven't spoken since. Currently, Jen and I are in the process of finding a new place to live. Our plan is to relocate closer to Jen's brother, who lives about 3 hours away from our current location, in a city we both like. I've talked to my boss about the possibility of transferring, and Jen is exploring the option of working remotely or finding a new job. Additionally, our wedding venue has changed again. Since our guest list is significantly smaller now, my future brother-in-law is considering allowing us to use his lake house for the wedding. I don't intend to post any more updates on this situation unless something major happens, at least not until after the wedding, because I want to move forward with our lives. However, I'll do my best to address any questions some of you may have. Edit. I'm already anticipating the potential consequences of our move. She might follow us because that's the kind of obsessive behavior she exhibits when she doesn't get her way. I've consulted with a lawyer friend of mine to explore the possibility of obtaining a restraining order to prevent her from causing trouble once we relocate.